Welcome to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM's POTUS.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM for Thursday, November 7th. I'm Andrew Waldworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan, and sitting in for Carl Cannon, White House correspondent Phil Wegmann. So, Tom, the Democratic Party is just at the start of what is sure to be a period marked by reevaluation and soul-searching, as well as some good old-fashioned recrimination, finger-pointing, and scapegoating. So let's start there. What are the Democrats up to, and who, if anyone, is going to take it on the chin for this week's election results?
Well, that's a good question, because the fingers are now pointing in all directions. I mean, you have Harris and some of her allies are blaming Joe Biden. There was a story out this morning in the Daily Mail that Biden and his group, they're blaming Pelosi because they feel like she's the one who pushed him out, started this whole thing. And then there's sort of the broader recriminations, which is Joy Reid on MSNBC and some of these other folks saying, she ran a flawless campaign. It's not her fault. It's the American people's fault because they're sexist and racist and misogynist. And so that to me is the bigger question. The internal finger pointing, these folks in the Democratic Party, and this happens in the Republican Party, right? When you win, you're a hero. When you lose, you're the GOAT, and you got to sort of take your medicine, and there'll be some reshuffling, et cetera. But the broader question is, will Democrats learn from what happened on Tuesday night, and will they be able to make adjustments that allow them to be more competitive next time around? Because clearly, I think the shift among Latinos in particular was pretty dramatic in a lot of these states. 15, 17, 20 points in places like Pennsylvania and some others. That's a serious problem, and they're going to have to do some serious soul searching. You can't just say, as Joe Scarborough said the other day, Latinos are sexist. They're just as sexist and racist as everybody else, maybe even more so. I mean, it's just like, that's not going to work. And so they're going to have to figure that out, and the sooner the better for the Democratic Party.
So, Phil, I think we should talk about sort of the broader thing, but I can't resist the sort of finger pointing inside the campaign. That's so much fun at this point. It always happens. What are you hearing, and who's in the hot seat?
Well, Joe Biden seemed particularly chipper when he spoke from the Rose Garden today. He was nothing but smiles. There's basically three camps here. You have the Biden people who are less than happy with how the Obama machine stepped in and questioned him publicly before he dropped out. You have the Obama folks who are frustrated that Biden didn't step aside sooner. And then you have some Harris aides who are saying, wait a minute, we got a bad deal here. And we took the playbook of the Obamas, but tried to run it with a candidate who wasn't Obama. There's going to be a lot of finger pointing and recriminations over the tactics of the campaign that really only had 100 days or so. But I think the larger thing here is that Harris had two arguments. The first was that Donald Trump was an existential threat to democracy. Biden tried that argument, and it didn't pan out very well for him. The other argument was this new way forward, which was sort of Bidenomics run through a spell checker. There wasn't a significant change. She copied and pasted that, and both of these fell short. And so now you have Democrats welcoming Donald Trump to the double president's club. He's the only guy since Grover Cleveland to serve 2 non-consecutive terms.
Yeah. Well, Tom, on the front page of RCP today, there's this piece from Newsweek. It's by David Ferris. I commend it to people because, one of the things he says, and he's coming at it, I think, safe to say he's a man of the left, that this idea of trying to use a Liz Cheney to appeal to disaffected Trump voters was a mistake, and that there simply were not enough disaffected Republicans out there. And the broader implication is that Harris should not have tried to move to the center, and that the effort to do that ended up alienating progressives, younger voters. So the problem is, in his view at least, that she wasn't progressive enough, that she should have stuck to her knitting. What do you think of that?
Well, look, that's an argument that progressives always make and conservatives always make, right? They made it with Romney. He wasn't conservative enough, right? We don't want pastels. We want bright colors and contrasts. And so we see this argument all the time. There's no evidence to support that Kamala Harris, if she was more progressive, more liberal, that she would have done any better. In fact, there's a report out that Bill Clinton was one, he was telling the Harris campaign, listen, on this transgender issue, that ad that was running where had her saying that she wanted to pay for transgender reassignment surgery for prisoners, state of California. And the Trump campaign turned that into an ad that said, she's for her, they, or whatever, and Trump's for you. That Clinton said, listen, you've got to answer that, and you got to answer it by getting in the middle and shutting it down. And they ignored him. And he thinks, again, there were a lot of reasons that she lost this campaign, but certainly that was one of the sort of cultural issues that Republicans were pushing hard, this whole idea that not having boys playing girls sports and that whole thing. The other thing, too, is, and this report came out today, and it's absolutely mind-blowing, that the Harris campaign, which raised over $1 billion and had $118 million on hand 2 weeks ago, is $20 million in debt. That's the report, which is I haven't seen it confirmed. Let's just take it, on face value for now. That's remarkable. I mean, she spent, and her campaign spent, an inordinate amount of money in this race and couldn't get it done. So that's another, I think, thing that Democrats are going to have to go back and do, sort of a forensic analysis of the book. How did they spend all that? Were they paying Beyonce to come and not perform? Like, where did all that money go? Right. And was it used as effectively as it could have been to make the difference in this race? Because clearly, they spent a lot of money and they ended up on got the short stick.
Yeah, Phil, I'm just looking at this, and I think we're still sort of in the cloud of war here. I mean, I don't think anyone quite has sorted all of this out, but is there a danger that the Democrats are going to draw a lot of conclusions about this when this was actually such a unique situation where Kamala Harris was thrown at the last minute? There were so many things that made this a unique moment in American politics that it's harder to sort of, draw the sort of conclusions, the kinds of things that we're talking about, like, oh, they've got to move left, they've got to move right. It's a policy position. They spent their money wrong. This was such a strange election that there's a danger that you'll conclude the wrong things based on a situation that isn't repeatable.
After the Mitt Romney loss in 2012, the RNC commissioned that very famous autopsy, and they had proposals for small tweaks here and changes there, when what Donald Trump showed up with in the subsequent election was a wholesale change. It wasn't just changes at the margins. It was a completely different set of values. And I'm curious to see if that's the route that Democrats go. But based off of what they did after Trump was elected the first time around, I don't think that much will change. There was a lot of soul searching in January of 2017 about how Democrats and the media did not understand the middle of the country, that they didn't quite get it. But they never learned any lessons, I don't think. Certainly the media didn't learn how to cover Trump or his supporters any better. What I find ironic about this whole conversation is, when we were evaluating Harris, it was in light of her 2019 campaign for the Democratic nomination. And you had a lot of people saying, oh, she misread the tea leaves and moved too far left. And that's why she lost the nomination then. But Biden sort of tacked towards the center. A good example of this is that all of the Democratic candidates that year, they put their pronouns in their Twitter bios. The one candidate who did not was Joe Biden. Obviously, he governed much more as a progressive. But what I think that Democrats have to do is they have to evaluate their entire platform here, because what they were selling to the American people, didn't work. Certainly, the big issue, abortion access, was not a winner for them.
Yeah, not this time around. It seemed like last time, though. Tom, go ahead.
Phil mentioned the 2012 autopsy, and one of the proposals in that was that Republicans had to really, sort of they need to engage with Latino voters and, make themselves more palatable and offer them pathways to citizenship and all this stuff. And you're right. Trump came in and was like, Mexicans not sending their best, they're sending the rapists and the, drug lords and all that. And he won. So here he is this election, and immigration, once again, is a big issue. And you go down there, he won all of those counties in the Rio Grande Valley.
Yeah.
He had, and we had this massive shift. It turns out, actually, the Hispanics down by the border were so tired of the free-for-all that was going on there that they all voted overwhelmingly for Trump. Turns out people like legal immigration, but they don't like what's going on. And so I guess my point is, if Democrats, the thing they shouldn't do is sit down and listen to a bunch of consultants inside high-priced consultants inside D.C. to write their new platform. They should stop insulting Americans, get out and engage with Americans, go fan out across the country and talk to working class folks and figure out, what they missed, and then write their report. If they do it from D.C., it's going to fail.
Trump's central, thesis here was that yes, the economy is important, but he saw immigration as still the driving topic, and he sort of read things correctly, sort of dovetailing those two, when a lot of the political class got it wrong. I think that's worth mentioning in light of him running up the score in some of these border states.
Yeah. Well, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Phil. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the Republicans a little bit and look at Trump world and what's happening there. Don't go away. Real Clear Politics will return after this.
This is Real Clear Politics on POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics
on POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I've got with me Tom Bevan, and sitting in for Carl Cannon, White House correspondent Phil Wegmann. And Phil, let's talk about Trump world. The AP story from this morning says the Trump administration starts now. There are 75 days until he takes office on January 20th. He's got about 4,000 government positions to fill with the political appointees. So he's got about a month and a half ahead that's going to be pretty busy. Who's in charge of this transition, and what are you hearing?
Howard Lutnick is the one at the helm. Certainly Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita are making their input known. We're going to see what changes they make, whose advice they privilege. But the big difference here is that in 2016 and 2017, Donald Trump showed up to Washington as a complete and total political novice. Originally, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie was in charge of the transition. He was yanked halfway through, and Vice President Mike Pence was the one who was doing the hiring. The reason why I bring that up is that the sort of ad hoc approach to staffing the Trump administration led to a situation where you had a lot of longtime Republican officials and operatives making their way into a Trump administration, but they weren't necessarily true believers when it came to Trump's economic and foreign policy agenda. The America First crowd, they were still sort of the JV team. This time around, though, one of the things that strikes me is that there are three generations of MAGA: the folks who were there originally, those who were in his administration in 2020, and the folks who have really worked with him during this election. They now have a professionalized base, and they have people that they can draw from who have either been in government before or a government adjacent. The difference is they are true believers, and so I think that they realize this is Trump's last dance, and they're going to try and make it worth as much as possible.
Yeah, Tom. So as Phil says, it's Cantor Fitzgerald CEO Howard Lutnick is in charge, along with Linda McMahon. I think she's the co-chair. She's the former wrestling executive. She led the Small Business Administration during Trump's first term. But, let's talk about some of the big names. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Trump says he's going to make America healthy again. Is he in line to be Secretary of Health and Human Services?
I don't know if he's going to.
But wouldn't you like to know?
I would like to know. That might be a bridge too far? I'm not sure. Maybe he's going to be, have the title of czar of something, as opposed to be in the cabinet itself. People were saying Marco Rubio was sort of auditioning for Secretary of State the other day. Senator Tom Cotton said he does not want an appointment. He was being talked about as Secretary of Defense potentially, says he's going to stay in the Senate. So we're getting a sense. But I think more broadly, to Phil's point, there were two things that happened. One was that he's right. He was basically scrambling to fill positions. He got a bunch of people in there who were not loyal to him. And it was the leakiest administration we've ever seen. I mean, just complete and utter chaos. On top of that, then he went and tried to go back and pull some loyalists, like Omarosa and Anthony Scaramucci. I mean, it was just the sort of clown show happening. And, Trump had always said, I hired the best people. And part of the problem, too, was, and I think this has changed a little bit, but there was this absolute, every Democratic administration leaves, Jen Psaki, she's off to have her own show on MSNBC. And, these people, Jay Carney and some of these others, they go off and they're working for Uber or Amazon or, Walmart or some of these big corporations. The Trump people were blackballed and blacklisted. They were not allowed to have any sort of employment. They were basically run out of town and told, don't come knocking on our door because you're not going to get a job. And so that was a real, I think, limitation to getting people. It was a deterrence for people to join the administration. I'm not sure that exists anymore, or it certainly doesn't exist in the same way that it did. Maybe it still would exist to a certain degree, but I think there are more people that are more loyal to Trump and who are less concerned with some of that other stuff. So he should staff up pretty quickly, I would think. And then the other thing is, if they control the House, control the Senate, they will get to work and get to work quickly. The folks I've talked to who were in the 2016 administration, after they got in 2017 or 2018, they moved pretty quickly on, regulation and cutting things, in part because it's kind of a funny story. There used to be, the old way of doing things was, they'd have to formulate a policy and then they'd sort of focus group it and all that. And then they'd have to get everybody lined up for the Sunday shows to go out there and sort of roll out the new policy and make sure that, everybody was on board, blah, 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 blah. With Trump, it was, he would tweet something crazy and the media would be over here running around chasing Trump, talking about, whatever. And so the people who were behind the scenes, they didn't check with anybody. They didn't focus group anything. They just did stuff. And so they were getting stuff done. The guy that I talked to said they got more stuff done in like 6 months than they did in 4 years during the George W. Bush administration, because they just didn't have any of the traditional stuff that you previously had to do inside of Washington. So I expect they're going to get to work fast and they're going to get stuff done.
Well, Phil, what about Elon Musk, of course, who's the other guy that we're also wondering. Secretary of Cost Cutting, is that a new cabinet post? What are they thinking?
I'm not certain that Elon Musk would be happy with any official role in an administration that seems actually too small ball for him. In all likelihood, rather than untangling the giant conflict of interest web between his companies and the federal government, I think that he will serve as a sort of outside advisor, and maybe in a new environment where the main thing is just whatever Donald Trump says, and then you have a small platoon of folks behind the scenes moving to implement that policy. Maybe the main thing is actually just having Donald Trump's ear. So perhaps Elon Musk's role will be limited. I've talked to some folks who previously did a lot of the red tape cutting, and they certainly expect him to be more of an advisor than anything else. But what I'm looking for right now, the two big roles for Trump to fill are: one, chief of staff, and then two, who's going to helm the Office of Personnel and Management. That's going to tell us a bit more about who the personnel will be who are going to be making policy for him.
So who's on the short list, Phil?
So right now for chief of staff, obviously the two big names are Susie Wiles. The job is likely hers if she wants it, but she's not a creature of government. She's a creature of campaigns. Brooke Rollins, who is the head of
I thought
AFBI.
Trump didn't like smart, intelligent women. He didn't like, isn't that what Mark Cuban said?
Mark Cuban might be getting his information from a different source than I am. But Brooke Rollins, she was domestic policy counsel. She, would be competitive for this job as well. One name that I'm hearing a lot, though, is Steve Witkoff. He was with Donald Trump during the second assassination attempt. He was golfing with him that day on the 19th hole. And he's a wealthy individual who Trump certainly respects. Potentially, he could be a contender here. But we're going to learn a lot, and we'll see who actually wants this job. Because campaigning with Trump is one thing, but then when you're inside of the concentric circle and you actually have access to the levers of power, you're not dealing with just who's up and down in the press. And you have a question of what's actually getting done, what's actually being achieved.
And, once you take that job, you're taking on the risk that you could be, fired by tweet at any time, which is not something that, some of these folks, I can't imagine Elon Musk, if he and Trump got in an argument or something and Trump just fired him.
A former Trump chief of staff explained it to me this way. He said, you want to be on the outside concentric circle, because when things aren't going well with Donald Trump, he'll pick up the phone, he'll talk to you, and you can commiserate with the president and say, yes, sir, things are going so poorly for you. But then when you're inside the inner circle and you're responsible for getting things done, yes, you can still commiserate and say, I'm so sorry that the media is treating you poorly, but you have to produce results. And so not everyone has made that transition from the outside in and survived to tell the tale.
Yep.
Well, hey, Tom, we've just got a little bit of time left here, and I did want to check in on any election results, anything that we didn't know yesterday that we know today.
Well, I mean, the big thing that's still hanging out there is this McCormick race in Pennsylvania, the Senate race. And it looks like he's got a lead and he's going to win that race, which would get the Republicans to pick up 4 seats in the Senate. It looks like Nevada's still counting, but it looks like Jackie Rosen's going to hang on there. And they're still counting in Arizona, but it looks like, Kari Lake is not making up enough ground on Ruben Gallego. So the Republicans are probably going to lose both those races. But still, knocking off Bob Casey in Pennsylvania is going to take the Republicans up to 53 seats in the Senate, which, they started at 49. So it's not a huge majority, but it is a majority. And then the question is, well, who becomes the Republican leader? And we know that there are, Tim Scott announced he's going to throw his hat in the ring. You've got the McConnell crew, John Cornyn, John Thune. Rick Scott already challenged McConnell previously. You have to think he's going to, coming off of his big win in Florida, that he's going to be in the mix too. So that's also an interesting thing that's going to be happening is who Republicans are going to find to lead them in the Senate.
Yeah, and all 7 swing states now have been called for Trump. They all moved as one. Tom, correct?
That's right.
Yep,
Carl's not here.
I was going to say
he's listening. Carl, I'd like a bottle of, I don't know, what should I get, Andy? Something good. It's got to be expensive.
I've got some ideas.
How about that Real Clear Politics average? Turns out it's pretty accurate.
Pretty
That's
good.
True too. Yeah.
Some might be worth some follow-up coverage from some of our friends in the press.
Well, I'm always curious when Carl doesn't show up, and sometimes it seems to be on days when he is going to lose one of these big bets with
yes.
Tom. So, but hopefully he'll be back with us tomorrow. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking with Tom and Phil. Don't go away, because Tom's going to be back, and he's going to talk to Spencer Kimball, pollster, about some of these polls. And then later in the broadcast, I talked to Tevi Troy. He's a presidential historian. He's always got something interesting to say. So don't go away. Real Clear Politics will return after this.
This is Real Clear Politics on POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124.
Not bound by any left-right constructs.
Real Clear Politics, open to a wide political spectrum.
This is POTUS on Sirius XM Channel 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder, president of RCP. Joined on the phone now by Spencer Kimball. He's director of polling at Emerson College. Spencer, good to have you back.
Tom, thanks for having me as always.
Okay, well, we interviewed you a number of times, including on election night, but leading into this election, Spencer, and now, this is it. We have our pre-election polls where The pollsters do the best job they can to figure out what the electorate is going to look like on election day. And now we know what it looked like. What surprised you the most? I mean, I assume, your polling turned out to be pretty darn good. And so I assumed you picked up on a lot of the trends that were going on in these battleground states. But what was the one thing now looking back that surprised you that maybe you didn't see, or you didn't see at the magnitude that it showed up on Tuesday night?
Yeah, I would say it was the Hispanic vote on that. And that impacted our polls from Texas to Nevada. We saw the Hispanic vote switch over during Biden and Trump when that race was going on before the debate. And it was interesting to see how strong Trump was doing with the Hispanic vote. Then when Harris came into the race, our Hispanic numbers dropped back to, where we traditionally see Democrats up 15, 20 points. And it turns out that's not what happened. And so we'll take some time to look at the data. Generally, it doesn't impact us in a great way because it's a subset of the population. It's not a majority of the population. But in a state like Nevada or in Arizona, where it does have, or Texas, that has a stronger, even in Florida. So you can see it's a growing population. And that's why we're going to take some time this offseason to study that group.
I saw a number, Spencer, and I forget where I saw it. And maybe you can confirm this, because I'm always skeptical of stuff I see it was somewhere, I think it was in Pennsylvania, or maybe somewhere within Pennsylvania, that the Hispanic vote moved 27 points in Trump's favor from 4 years ago, they went from 42 Dems plus 42 to Dems plus 15. That is a massive shift in 4 years.
Yeah, no, the Republicans made a concerted effort at this. And remember, if you go back to 2000, the Bush administration tried very hard to get into that Hispanic vote. But ever since Obama, it really switched back to the Democrats in a big way. This is the first time. Now, we saw Trump make some inroads in 2020, but these are beyond inroads, where the Democrats might be fighting this group 50-50 in 2028.
So one of the things that we were talking about, Spencer, and was a big topic of discussion, was, are the polls undercounting Donald Trump once again? And turns out the answer was yes, in the aggregate. And, if you go look at our poll averages, they were pretty good, though. I mean, yes, they undercounted Trump by anywhere from 1 to, I think the worst miss this time around was Nevada, because a lot of folks had that race close, and he's going to win that by, I don't know, what is it, like 3.8 points he's up now. But by and large, again, and this is like, we had the New York Times in there, and their polls were awful this year. We had Quinnipiac and some others that did. CNN had like a 6-point poll, and I think Wisconsin, which ended up tipping our average. But what do you think was the situation? I mean, was it the Hispanic vote? Was it other things? Were pollsters giving too much credence to the gender gap and Harris's ability to drive up the female vote, which turned out to be, looks like it wasn't as effective as they initially thought?
Well, in our polling, we didn't really buy into most of that. Harris never led in our Pennsylvania polls. It was always 0-1, leaning towards Trump. The movement in Pennsylvania was always in that Senate race. If you look at our numbers there, it goes from 6 down to a tie, and we're counting right now. So there was overall, I thought, if you look at the trends, that Trump was going into election night as the favorite, the odds on to win. And that's generally what you want the polls to do. Remember, we're not a precise instrument. We're not going to tell you 1 point, 1.8. We're a range of scores. But when you started to see these numbers coming and you realize, hey, we know that there's an undercount for Trump. I knew that. So anything that was tied, I was like, well, Trump's probably going to win those states. I'm not putting my thumb on the scale. I'm just, when I analyze that data and I talk to you on our interviews, I say, yeah, I think he's going to win Wisconsin. It might be tied, but we've always been off by 6-7 points. Why am I, if it's going to lean in a direction? But I think that the bias this year was not as significant as we certainly saw in 2016. And it was improved, nationally and at the state level, and from 2020 as well. So I would say, from a pollster's perspective, third time was a charm.
We're speaking with Spencer Kimball. He's director of polling at Emerson College. You mentioned, Spencer, Wisconsin was the state that was bad in 2016, wasn't much better in 2020 for a lot of folks. This year, pretty darn good. It certainly wasn't the worst state out there. For some, it seems like pollsters figured out Wisconsin a little bit. And, I think our average had Harris winning. Our final average had her up 0.4 of a point. Trump's going to win it by 0.8 of a point. But, there were plenty of folks that had that race tied or had Trump up a point. And so how did pollsters figure out Wisconsin this year? How did you guys crack that nut?
Well, we're still a little off in that Senate race, but at least on the presidential side, fool me twice, we're George Bush, fool me 3 times. We didn't get fooled 3 times. We saw from what would happen in 16 and 20. Now, we changed our methods a lot between 16 and 20. So in 20, we were using texting, we were using more online panels, and we weren't sure exactly how representative that was. We replicated that method again this time. So when we saw that data and you see those biases creep up, you kind of smile and say, not again. And that's how, in our case, we identified all of the mistakes from our 2020 polls, and we were looking out for them as we were polling in 2024. So as not to replicate those mistakes, instead we'll make others and learn from those as well.
Mm-hmm. There was this idea that it could be this, I don't know what you want to, narrow landslide, sneaky landslide, whatever. And that's basically what it ended up. Trump's going to win. He won the Electoral College 312 with 312 Electoral College votes, which in this day and age is a pretty good thumping because he swept all these states, even though he swept, a couple of them by thin margins. But he generally, you look at a place like North Carolina, which was considered close. He's up 3.3 there. I mentioned 3.8 in Nevada, 5.5 in Arizona. Pretty strong showing there. What are the takeaways? I mean, do you see Trump as being sort of this anomaly that, because when he wasn't on the ballot in 18 and 22, sort of the more traditional pollsters were better. Do you see Trump as this anomaly? Like, this is the last time you'll ever have to poll him. He's gone. He's going to be done. And so it's like, I mean, I guess you'll have a midterm, but he's not going to be on the ballot. Are you going to change things based on the fact that he's not on the ballot? Were you doing specific things just because it was Trump and because of the way that he is such a lightning rod for people on both sides?
Yeah, we did, because we learned from our mistakes. Now, we overcorrected in the midterms and got bit in a couple of states, like in Pennsylvania, but that didn't keep us from understanding what the lessons we learned from 2020, realizing that they don't apply in those midterm elections and that they do apply when Trump's on the ballot. And I would reference back to like Obama. He had a very similar type of turnout when he was on the ballot, but you get to those midterm elections and he's unable to bring out that vote when you're not there. And I think we'll see other candidates have that appeal as the candidate. And that's why I think those midterms in the presidential, you have to look at your weighting schemes and realize that when you have the candidate on the ballot, there are going to be slightly different turnout models than when they're not on the ballot.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If I could just say one last thing, Tom, you guys do a great job at Real Clear. It's a pleasure going to your website, and the way you aggregate and be able to look through polls. It's really important for people to be able to look at trends of the pollster, and the way you've created your website is really phenomenal. I just wanted to thank you for that.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. All right, we will leave it there. Spencer Kimball, Director of Polling for Emerson College. Spencer, it's been great having you on all year leading into this election, and we appreciate all the time you've given us to explain exactly, what the polling world, pull the curtain back on the polling world. So thank you. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM after this.
Online at RealClearPolitics.com.
On air on SiriusXM Channel 124.
Real Clear Politics is on POTUS. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics with Andrew Walworth. You're listening to SiriusXM's POTUS, Channel 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined now by presidential historian Tevi Troy. He has the lead article on today's RCP front page, and the title is The Disruptor. So, Tevi, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me. And thanks to RCP. When you get the lead piece on RCP, people notice. I'm getting all kinds of texts and messages from people. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, good. Well, it's a great piece. And you write in part, love him or hate him, the second election of Donald Trump as a president of the United States establishes him as one of the most significant and astounding figures in American history. With this second win, Trump has also done more to change the conventional wisdom than any American political figure in nearly a century. So, Tevi, in what ways has Trump changed the way you think that we should think about politics in America?
Yeah, well, first, just himself. 10 years ago, he was a joke. People made jokes about, oh, this Donald Trump guy, he's not a serious candidate. And now he's been president twice and has been the dominant figure in not only the Republican Party, but in American political politics for over a decade. The second thing is in terms of the mainstream media. They thought that they could shape races if the New York Times and the NBC and the Washington Post and NPR, and they were all arrayed against him. They thought they could stop him, or their thumb on the scale would elect Kamala Harris. It didn't work at all. And we see all kinds of different platforms, including your platform, but also including, let's say, Joe Rogan. That interview with Trump was listened to 45 million times on YouTube alone. And so it's a new way of getting information to the American people. And this has been a long-term trend in American politics, that new ways of getting information go into the realm of politics. Think about radio with Franklin Roosevelt, television with John F. Kennedy, and now Donald Trump with podcasting. It's really the new killer technology of this election. And then the third way is in terms of the coalition that the Democrats have counted on for over a generation, which is we've got Black votes, Hispanic votes, Jewish votes, and we are going to dominate with overwhelming majorities in those three areas. And not only did they not get overwhelming majorities in all three, they barely got a majority in Hispanics, and the Jewish vote looks very shaky for them. The Black vote was still a majority, but what Democrats need to win is such an overwhelming majority, 90+%, to go to them to win elections. And Trump got over 13% of the Black vote. So it was a real sea change in the way we get our information, how we look at Trump, and also what the Democratic coalition is.
Yeah, I want to circle back to the Hispanic vote in particular, because as you point out in the article, Trump won 45% of the Hispanic vote. There was this huge shift in Pennsylvania, 27-point shift among Hispanics towards Trump. And you suggest that, like Irish Americans and Italian Americans, Hispanic voters may be moving away from voting as a distinct coalition. And I'm wondering, though, is part of the problem definitional? That is, this whole idea of a Hispanic or Latino voting bloc has always been problematic for me. It seems to be sort of in the service of identity politics. We sort of created this category that throws together a bunch of distinct populations. You've got Mexican Americans, Cuban Americans, Puerto Rican Americans. You have recent immigrants, and you've got Californians who've been here since before California was a state, and we lump them all together as the Hispanic vote. And it seems to me that one of the benefits of this election may be that we stop thinking so hard about these voting blocks, defining them by ethnicity and race, and think about other things, occupation or level of education, rural versus urban. I mean, should we be viewing politics differently, both from the point of people who practice politics and design the ads and the campaigns, but also from the media point of view of how we cover them?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think we should get away from race, and I think we would be better off as a country, more unified as a country, if we got away from the race, from the constant focus on race. And I am inspired in this by so many other things, by Ronald Reagan, who used to say in his speeches, "Liberty binds us together." 4 words, but incredibly powerful words that say we're not about our race or our gender or our ethnicity or the things that divide us, but we're united by the shared conception of a country where we can live in liberty. And everybody, regardless of your race or ethnicity, can get behind that. And that was the Ronald Reagan vision. And the Democratic vision of dividing us into these different racial groups, A, is not working, but it's bad for the unity of America.
Yeah. My guest is presidential historian Tevi Troy. I should mention also that he has a new book out. It's called The Power and the Money, and it's the story of how America's top business leaders have interacted with presidents over the years. Tevi, in that light, how do you view the role of Elon Musk in the Trump campaign? And is there a historical precedent for a business leader being this involved in a campaign?
Yeah, I mean, the Musk situation is indeed fascinating, and I talk a lot about this kind of stuff in The Power and the Money. But there have been business leaders who've gotten at least as involved before. I think of Henry Luce, who was the founder of Time magazine, who went all in for Eisenhower in 1952, and he provided staff for Eisenhower. He had his magazine support Eisenhower. He came up with the ideas for the Republican Party platform on foreign policy. So he was very involved in the Eisenhower campaign. And in some ways, he got what he wanted. Eisenhower won. His wife became ambassador to Italy. But in other ways, it kind of hurt him and the reputation of his magazine because Time was so all in on Eisenhower that it became seen as more of a partisan and less of a neutral journalistic platform. So you can win a race and still there are risks involved.
And, Elon Musk, the other thing, I'm sure Luce had a lot of interest in front of the government, but couldn't come close to what Musk has in terms of NASA and defense contracts for his
Starlink
company.
Boring company.
Yeah. EVs, you name it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
It's he's really got a lot of business with the federal government, doesn't he?
Yeah. Absolutely. And it raised the question of if Harris won, would she take it out on him? Mm. Would they engage in aselective enforcement, which is there's so many regulations, nobody can enforce every regulation. But if there's an actor that's disfavored, you sure can focus the regulatory state on that person. The second thing is there are all kinds of government contracts. And those government contracts that go, for example, to SpaceX or to Starlink, those were things that potentially could be at risk. And then the third is just the disfavor of the government has impact too. So Joe Biden had a summit on electric vehicles, and he did not invite Musk or Tesla.
Wow.
And everybody said, this is ridiculous. I mean, if anybody you ask who is behind electric vehicles, everyone in the country would say Elon Musk. And the Biden administration acted like Musk, never heard of him. So there are multiple ways in which presidential disfavor can have an impact on a company.
Yeah. So in your piece, Tevi, you write, this is your conclusion, I think, all this speaks to bracing new realities. The mainstream media has lost its power to persuade. The Democratic coalition that maintained the vaunted blue wall is no longer. And the disruptor, Donald Trump, carving his place into the nation's political history, has more of an electoral mandate for change than any incoming president since Barack Obama in 2009. So, in your view, how big is that mandate? Because it's still a divided country. He won the popular vote, that's true, and he won the Electoral College, but Senate is going to be narrowly divided still. The Democrats still may take the House, we don't know. And in 2 years, they, what happens to presidents, and you can tell us what happens to presidents 2 years into their first term. They often face a backlash. So how big a mandate is it really, in your view?
Well, I said it's the biggest mandate since Obama in 2009, which really isn't that long ago. I didn't say it's the biggest mandate since, let's say, FDR in 1932. But it was surprising. People did not expect him to win a clear victory on election night. They weren't sure that Republicans would take the Senate. And I'm surprised at what a good chance the Republicans have to keep the House, because a lot of the conventional wisdom that they wouldn't get that. And my line in there was more a dig at John Meacham and his approach to Biden in 2020, when he told Biden, who had a narrower victory, barely won the Senate, and he said, you should act like FDR or LBJ. And I call that in the piece the original sin of the Biden administration, by trying to do LBJ or FDR style changes without LBJ or FDR style majorities. I think he led his administration off on the wrong foot and led to not only unpopularity, a feel of overreach, but also that, in addition to his advancing age, led to him being kicked off the ticket in the summer of 2024.
So how do you think Trump should use this mandate?
Well, I think that Newt Gingrich did something very smart in 1994 when the Republicans took over Congress. He had this idea about the 70% issues. I'm going to go and forward and push the passage of ideas that have 70% approval of the American people. And some of these things are hard to get through because of Democratic opposition. So, for example, cracking down on illegal immigration or voter ID. Those things have huge support, huge majorities if you ask in public opinion polls, but Democrats are strongly against them, or at least the elected party leaders in Washington. So I think those are good issues where you could kind of frame the debate as Democratic establishment entrenched interests versus the vast majority of the American people. And I think going after issues like that would be a smart way of using this majority.
Well, Tevi, that's we're going to have to leave it there. This has been great. My guest has been Tevi Troy. We'll be checking back with him, I'm sure, regularly, which I love to do with Tevi. So I'll leave you with my simple request, which I make from time to time to our listeners, and that is please go to RealClearPolitics.com, read one article from a writer or publication with whom you disagree. It may be Tevi, it may be Phil Wegmann, it may be someone else, but it's always a good way to pierce that news bubble we all occasionally end up in, myself included. I'm Andrew Walworth. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you back here on Real Clear Politics tomorrow. Have a great evening.
The
Politics
of
the
United States.
This is POTUS on SiriusXM Channel 124.